All right, listen up, nacho chips. Quiet down, crispy potatoes. This is the moment Velveeta's been preparing you for, and you're not about to crack under pressure. Today's the day to go all in on the drip. Velveeta's Heat and Eat Queso is the MVP of any game day spread, so stick by them, and you'll be golden. Now get out there and make delicious history. No tailgate party is complete without Velveeta.
Welcome to the Sportsman's Voice podcast, your inside connection to outdoor legislation. From the Beltway to policy happening your way, we're covering it all. I'm your host, Fred Bird. Join us as we explore public land access, wildlife and fisheries management, Second Amendment rights, the triumphs that shape our nation, the sports we all love, and the stories that fuel our passion for the great outdoors. This is the Sportsman's Voice podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure now to welcome in a three-guest panel. We're talking about public lands on this session. Senior Vice President of Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation, Taylor Schmitz, Cyrus Baird, Vice President of Government Affairs and Chief Policy Officer with Delta, both with Delta, John Devney, who you guys heard from last year at last year's NASC. Gentlemen, thanks for making the time. It's a great summit so far, huh?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Fred.
You guys enjoying it?
Oh, yeah.
Lots of good stuff being had, lots of conversations in the coffee hall, as it were. It's nice to see everyone enjoying themselves. Like I said, we're talking public lands. This has been both a contentious and a positive topic over the last year anyway. We're heading into 2026. We've had some policy victories, some good collaboration on it. But Taylor, I'm going to start with you. You've been heavily involved with this stuff. We've got, again, a myriad of things to do with public lands. What have we been doing at CSF and then also working with our partners?
Yeah, thanks, Fred. I think the most immediate thing that comes to mind is the public lands fight that we dealt with over the summer. And I think everybody that is a hunter, that's an angler, recreational shooter, or trapper is aware of this. And it was the biggest fight that we've dealt with within the sportsman's community in arguably the last 3-4 decades.
Yeah.
And good or bad, it received a ton of national attention. And really the issue here was an effort floating around in Congress, and I'll only focus on one in particular, to sell off 2 to 3 million acres of our federal public lands. And for us, part of the challenge for us at CSF is not that we're necessarily opposed to selling off small targeted parcels of federal public land, but what acres are we talking about here, right? And when it's just some arbitrary mandate to dispose of this land, we don't know if we're talking about 3 million acres in Utah, if we're talking about 2 acres in Utah, right? And defining access and how to prevent loss of access for sportsmen and women, something that we're talking about a lot here at the conference, is no net loss for sportsmen and women, right? So finding access is tough.
Well, in as we all know, there's a defined process, right, that has been widely accepted by the sportsman and conservation community about how we divest of those lands. And so to sort of supersede that process without a lot of clarity, without a lot of sort of recognition of existing administrative actions that could be taken, I think all of us sort of reacted in the same way, which was, yeah, no thanks.
Yeah, and I understand where people are frustrated with the processes that we have in place, right? They're bureaucratic, they're burdensome, they're slow. But there's a reason for that, right? And the reason is that if we lose these things, if we do this in a rushed manner, we're going to lose these acres forever, right? So I understand where people get frustrated by it, but to your point, John, there's a process that we have to go through, and there's a reason for that.
Right.
And who was it, Zinke, that said he's got the hotel line, right? Where he said if the hotel is not functioning properly, you don't sell the hotel, you get new management.
Correct.
Right.
Exactly.
Cheesy as it is, it's pretty good. Yeah.
And to that point, right, there's real challenges facing some of these Western lands in terms of lack of management. You know, you look at things like the BLM, right? It's not because the managers at the BLM don't care. It's that they don't have the resources to manage that we need to. So
I think getting back to the existing administrative function that already exists was a big part of that story over the summer, right? Like, just so many people, and looking across social, and I'm coming at this from a Joe Sixpack point of view. If you're scrolling on Instagram or Facebook, whatever, and you see this stuff blowing up, and people are rightfully getting upset or like, oh, how dare you do this, and think the world's coming to an end when we came out and had our position, and others as well, and they said, "Look, this exists. Like, this isn't new information. It's new to you, and it's getting
Right.
amplified because of we're in 2025 and information's instantaneous." And to Taylor's point, it is bureaucratic for a good reason. But I think out of all that, I think people learning that system is already in place was arguably at least a second, A-B score. I think it was a B that people learned that exists, and then A that people are talking about public lands and have an interest.
Yeah, I think people learning and really understanding this programming and processes that are in place is critical. But I also think one of the benefits, if there was a benefit to this fight, was people sitting back and saying, how can we fix this process that's in place, right?
Right.
And that's not going to be fixed in a matter of 6 to 8 months. That is going to take, unfortunately, it's going to take years to develop a solution to that. And it's going to require all of us in this room and all of our partners, in the sports community and also other industries to really roll up our sleeves and make sure that we're trying to figure this out in a way that addresses some of the concerns floating around out there, but also doesn't hurt us as sportsmen and women. Yeah.
Talk to the important. We're here at our NAS summit. What does the legislative sportsmen's caucuses at the state level play in a conversation like this? This is obviously we're talking about happened on the Hill. It's a federal issue, but stakeholders in states have a say. They have people they got to talk to about this, especially their constituency. How does this whole thing play together and the big symbiosis universe of policy making and where we're at now?
Yeah, that's a great question, Fred. I would say that it's critical, first and foremost. State legislators play a critically important role in what members of Congress are deciding. I think for a couple of reasons. One of those reasons is, here at the Congressional Sportsmen Foundation, we're 2 blocks from the United States Capitol building. And good or bad, folks get to see us every single day of the week, right? And can be quite a pain sometimes, depending what's going on. But they don't get to see their state legislators every single day. And when they're hearing from these folks that are not only constituents, but they're also fellow policymakers.
Yeah.
And these fellow policymakers are going to have to be responsive to the constituents that aren't decision makers at the end of the day. So it's critical for the state legislators that are here and the 2,300 members that make up the NASC network to make their voices heard to the members of Congress. Because again, at the end of the day, they're there to represent them just as much as they're there to represent us.
Cyrus, from a Delta standpoint, talk about how those state level organizations, those state level caucuses have helped your work. How does this all come together for you guys specifically at Delta, and what are the benefits there?
Yeah, the caucus network is super valuable for us in our policy work. I mean, I don't know that we'd say we're a small organization anymore. We're pushing 100 people, but the policy team, at least on the state side, is 4 individuals. And so having that network of not only CSF staff, but having that access to caucus leadership and caucus members across the state, it's like having a go-to person in that state that hey, I can go to this lawmaker with this issue and know one that they, think like us and are usually on board with what we're talking about and stuff like that. But just having the resources too, of having those people in the states to bounce ideas off of and inevitably when bad ideas come up, knowing that you've got allies in certain states and in certain state capitals that can help beat back, bad legislation year after year. That is almost more valuable, in my opinion, at least to some of the work that we do, than maybe going on the offense in some cases, is having that built-in network of caucus leadership that can help beat back, bad bills that impact not only ducks but duck hunters. So
No, I just, Cyrus and the folks that are working on state policy, I get it sort of second, third hand, but having that network and listen, there's been a lot of very consequential wins for hunters writ large, right? I
Yeah.
mean, Sunday hunting in Pennsylvania, Sunday hunting in Delaware,
Connecticut.
Connecticut. There's all sorts of examples where this partnership and collaboration under CSF's leadership and the good work they've done to form these caucuses is translating into real impact and real results for hunters. And we're glad to be a partner in that and appreciate the good work that's going
Absolutely.
into it.
Yeah, one thing I'd add too from a CSF perspective is our full-time job is policy, right? And our full-time job is knowing legislators, knowing the inner workings of the state legislature or Congress or what have you, but we don't always know every single issue facing waterfowl hunters or waterfowl populations, right? And that's why it's critical to have partners like John and Cyrus that we can call on and say, "Hey, I know this a little bit, but can you guys give me more information
Right.
about this? And here's what we're going to do on the policy side, but I need you guys as our partners on the science side to really help us out here." We
good
don't have
relationship.
that.
Right. Yeah, you can't know everything, and then that's that's huge. Because why is this important to them, and then how can we advocate? It's kind of a bigger, rose-colored glasses looking at our entire community, right? Because you got people that are diehard this, diehard that, certain equipment, and don't take the time to ask questions. Why is it important to me? Why is it important to them?
Right.
And we just constantly get divided instead of, I think it's a great example. We all work together and support each other. And this is why it's important. This is why we think we need to take this position. And then we end up inevitably coming out with, policy positions with sign-ons from all of our partners, which speaks volumes because as a membership-based organization in Delta, every time we put your logo on something or you put your logo out there, you're representing thousands and thousands of constituencies, and those people are likely voters.
Yeah.
And that means something.
And I think that's another example, the marriage and sort of the partnership, right? Is, CSF's done a great job through NASC, building relationships, building the caucuses, but we can bring real constituents to bear on these issues. And, as an organization whose constituents love engaging in this, um, you know, our members really welcome the opportunity to participate in the process and part of that process has been facilitated by NASC and the caucuses.
Yeah. Going into 2026 here, what public land issues do we see? What are we already engaged in, if we can discuss anything like that, that's remained unresolved this year? Taylor.
I think one of the things that comes to the top of my mind is reauthorization of a portion of the Great American Outdoors Act to restore maintenance infrastructure backlog on our federal public lands. And in 2020, Congress passed the Great American Outdoors Act, and as part of that, they included about $9.5 billion to restore uh, deferred maintenance backlog on federal lands, being the Bureau of Land Management, Forest Service, the refuge system. But the bulk of the money went to the National Park Service. And I think everybody in this room loves the national parks, right? But the national parks don't facilitate hunting opportunities. So for us, one of the things that we've sat back with our partners at Delta, and I'll would ask John to speak to this in a second here, is how can we provide more money to the National Wildlife Refuge system? Something that is uniquely set up for wildlife, something that is uniquely set up for migratory birds, but also something that hunters truly envision themselves as being a part of.
Yeah.
Unlike the Park Service, which again we all love here, but we're not going out and sitting in a duck blind international park.
It'd be pretty cool if you could.
There'd be a couple spots I'd put on the list. Yeah.
Let's not do that. But again, I think for us, really sitting back and looking at some of these uniquely American places that were set up truly for wildlife, and how can we get more resources invested into those areas?
Yeah. And, if you go back and look at budgets, whether, Republican, Democrat, president's budgets or enacted budgets, refuge system's been declining in relative importance within the Fish and Wildlife Service going back to 2010. And I think if you would ask sportsmen and women sort of the core functions of the Fish and Wildlife Service, refuges would be really high on that list. And so I think the agency over time is just like our state game and fish agencies and lots of examples around the world have been pulled in a million different directions. And the challenge with that is, there's not a heck of a lot of more new money available. And so you end up trying to stretch a dollar further. And I think in the case of the Fish and Wildlife Service, where we've got a $2.6 billion deferred maintenance backlog, where you've lost 711 staff, about a 30% reduction in staff since 2010. That starts to have real felt consequences. And the people that I think are feeling it most dramatically aren't necessarily Taylor, Cyrus, or John.
Right.
It's duck hunters. And they're going to places that they hunted that, for because the water control structure is damaged, isn't holding water, or because of the lack of staff complement, we're not managing intensively as we used to. And our duck hunter members and the duck hunting public is seeing that play out time after time after time. And so it's what's really drawn our focus. And I greatly appreciate CSF being engaged in this as well. Is this has to be elevated as a priority in the community. And I think we're starting to see that.
Yeah.
I think we're starting to see people talk about refuges in a way. Taylor, you'll remember being at Big Sky when you unceremoniously got handed the gavel because the chairman of AWCP left early. But that started a real conversation within the conservation community because I think people had kind of forgotten about refuge.
Well, for a while, it just felt like it was me and you talking about it, and
Right.
it felt weird, in big rooms of all of our partners. And this is not a knock on anyone, but it just felt like you and I were talking about it. And now it seems like this issue is growing and it's becoming, more widely held by a lot of our partners, which is great. So the momentum is building behind it. Yeah.
And Cyrus, why do you think that is? I think from my perspective, like I have my reason in mind, and I think that's because of some of the lack of investments being put into the refuge system. I think
Yeah.
a lot of hunters have said, I'll just go hunt somewhere else, right? I'm not going to deal with that. And have they lost interest in that? That's my perspective on it, at least as an Easterner.
Are you asking why?
Why did we kind of just lose focus on it as a community?
I don't know. I really don't. And you kind of teed it up nicely when you were talking about kind of the suite of our public land and federal assets, but like the refuge system in particular, like find me another thing that has a more intrinsic woven kind of relationship specifically with duck hunters than our National Wildlife Refuge system. Bought and paid for and acquired and all that stuff with proceeds of the federal duck stamp. And most of them have some type of congressional charter mandate
Or migratory
or
birds.
migratory birds.
Right.
And like, so yeah, I mean, it's, I think the duck hunting community has largely been hip to this issue for a while. But I think as it's gotten worse, you've seen other, user groups and stuff like that really realize it. And John talked about the decrease in the number of staff, obviously, 29-30% in the last 15 years. And what that's done is the service has had to complex all these refuges together. So, where you've had a refuge that used to have maybe 10 full-time staffers, now you've got one person that's overseeing 4 or 5 refuges across, multiple different jurisdictions. And that's really tough for them, as John said, and we talked about in our presentation this morning, like managing for waterfowl is not managing for whitetail deer and turkey and stuff like that. And this is, again, not a knock on them. It just requires a lot more intention. That's what intensive management. And it's really hard to do that when you've got 711 fewer people on the ground doing that. And,
And a bunch of water control
and a
structures.
bunch of blown dikes and levees and
Yeah.
a bunch of boards that weren't put in and all, you name it. And, yeah, and John referenced it too, like just looking at, the three of us will appreciate this, but just for the average sportsman, I don't think they necessarily look at president's budgets versus enacted budgets and all that stuff in their spare time. But like the trend line is pretty clear. So, it's become a devalued kind of priority across the political spectrum, dating all the way back to 2010. And so, yeah, sounding the alarm here for the last couple years on it, and now starting to get to the point where I think it's becoming, I don't want to say like the cool thing to care about, because I don't want to say it like that, but like people are starting to wake up to this issue. Hopefully we'll see some real meaningful change with Director Nesbitt and Secretary Burgum and others kind of at the helm now.
So, how do you make it important? How do you tell that story to our community? Because it is a niche thing. Your public really is the non-consumptive public really is not going to have an opinion one way or the other. It's not like they're out there just walking their dog kind of thing,
Yeah.
right? And there's controlled access, and access is tough on these things. But specifically from you guys, like most of the waterfowl community understands and bids this stuff opposed to turkeys and deer. Like I have one in New Hampshire that comes to mind, and it's a very controlled access thing. You got to put in for a lottery to hunt deer and turkey and stuff like that. So it's kind of cumbersome, but make it important to the community. What are the opinions? How do we tell that story?
I mean, we joked about it. The reason why I think the national park system gets as much funding and stuff as they do is because that's very front and center and present in a lot of average everyday Americans' lives. There's 573 national wildlife refuges across the country. And I think their claim to fame is there's a national wildlife refuge within 30 minutes of every American citizen, or is it 30 minutes. There's some distance thing that they
There's some close
calculated.
proximity to the overwhelming majority.
And
Juxtaposed to 63 national parks, most of it being in the west and north, right? So
and I just don't think that, and this is maybe not a knock on the service, maybe it's us, I don't know, but we just haven't done a good job of maybe advertising the National Wildlife Refuge system as this place that is so important to not only ducks but duck hunters. But again, talking about that kind of symbiotic relationship between duck hunters and how these places were acquired and all that stuff. I don't know that we just maybe haven't done as good of a job as we could have marketing that. I mean, getting a marketing campaign like the national park system has that makes this a front facing. These are your public lands just as much as the national parks and hang grant lands are, just as BLM lands and all that stuff. So, yeah,
in an era where people are constantly ballyhooing about access,
yeah,
and there's a lack of public land, and everyone's buying this up or posting this depending on where you live in the country, seems to be an easy play to get people fired up. Like, hey, like you just said, these are your lands and you can utilize them. Let's get fired up about it, right?
Yeah. And I think what you're seeing is and you can look at it sort of from two perspectives. You can look at it either from the perspective of the duck or perspective of the duck hunter. If we go back in time, there's never been a need for access more than there is today.
Mhm.
Yeah. And if you look at where we have great refuge assets, whether we're talking about Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, the East Coast, Central Valley, California, list goes on and on. These are places where we really need access, but we also really need high quality habitat
and
for
functioning.
wintering and staging waterfowl. And, we've had, you go to Louisiana, we've had a seismic change in agriculture with sugarcane coming in. Ducks don't eat sugar.
Yeah.
FYI, ducks don't eat sugarcane. They used to really love eating that rice, and that rice has been displaced by sugarcane. Economics, right? We understand that. We've lost we've lost an incredible amount of coastal habitat. We have refuges that have been impacted by hurricane after hurricane after hurricane. I would argue ducks need those public trust assets, whether we're talking about refuges or we're talking about state-owned WMAs. Ducks need them more than ever, and so do duck hunters. And so I think that's what's tuned our attention in this steady cadence from our members, our volunteers, and the duck hunting public saying, this isn't working, this isn't working, this isn't working, has really crystallized our thinking in this regard.
So, and at the top, well, at least at the top of this part of the conversation, you cited the lack of employment. There's just no one to physically go out there and maintain all this stuff. So when we look at habitat degradation, and then this the access portion of it, like what's the fix? What can Joe Sixpack do to get involved and be like, who do I contact? Where's the point of contact? They fire someone up and say, we as constituents, we as sportsmen and women that contribute directly to this system and maintain those public lands, who do they contact to get them to get the ball moving and say, oh, you cut a lot of people here in the beginning of 2024, or 2025 rather. What are we going to do to fix that? And how can we get back out here and make this work? Can Delta volunteers get out there and help?
I think we got a sniff of this. We were hearing sort of a very persistent concerns from our members last duck season. And I'm not going to blame anybody for this, but their experience at one space and time, they can conjure a reality, right? And this manager doesn't care. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. And I think all of us recognize, we came up on the panel today, is there may be examples where that's the case, but I don't think there's many examples where that's the case. It's just a lack of resources.
Correct. Right.
And so we did kind of a level set. We did a webinar with a bunch of our volunteers last year. We had 120 people jump on
like
100, yeah, 150 volunteers jump on a webinar to listen to dopes like me talk and Cyrus talk on a Wednesday night. It was pretty remarkable.
For like 2 hours.
For 2 hours. Yeah, it went on for a long time. And, Cyrus did a really nice job of having sort of a take-home homework assignment to contact legislators. And, Cyrus does what he does and made it real easy for everybody. And what did we trigger, Cyrus? And I mean,
I think we had like 1,500 emails into Hill offices in like less than 7 days. And there was no specific ask, right? Like it was just general, like, hey, we're duck hunters. We're kind of concerned about the state of the National Wildlife Refuge system and in terms of management and habitat and access and all that stuff. And just being able to raise that profile with members of Congress and, again, less than 7 days had 1,500, individual emails into, members' inboxes and stuff like that. So,
and I bet you a bunch of those members, it might have been the first time they heard about the National Wildlife
Yeah.
Refuge system.
Yeah.
To your point, and first, a point of order, John, you may do dopey things, but you're not a dope in an so just a point of order there, quickly. But I think to your point that this may be the first time many of these individuals have heard about refuges,
Yeah.
right? I think that is something that we all in this room really take for granted, this
Right.
understanding and appreciation for what these things are and why they're important. Every school child across America knows what the national park
Yeah,
system is,
right.
and everybody has their own national park story.
And every 5th grader gets free admission to the National Park
Yeah.
Service? I mean, it's a pretty darn good branding idea,
Yeah.
right?
And then for most people, they go to a wildlife refuge and they don't see what we see, right?
And they don't know what it is.
Correct.
Yeah.
They see bug-infested marshes. They don't envision just a flight of pintails pitching in there,
Yeah.
right? And they go there in the summer or when, in our part of the country in the east, when ducks aren't there, right? And they don't see it like we see it, right?
Yeah, and as our dear late friend Miles Moretti used to talk about, Miles was the CEO of Mule Deer Foundation, used to refer to the things that Cyrus and I care most about as uncharismatic microfauna. Mhm.
Yeah. I've heard of charismatic megafauna. I love it. Not the stuck out.
Miles decided to talk about ducks as uncharismatic
That's
microfauna.
good. Miles, I also disagree with that opinion as well.
Gentlemen, we're getting to the end of our session here. Clearly, there's tons of work to be done. Minds here are thinking about it, out there thinking about it. Your membership is thinking about it, and it sounds like the trajectory is positive. It's just a matter of really activating people and making those phone calls, taking 1,500 emails and turning that into 10,500 emails, right? And just getting people going. And, to Delta's credit and some of the other NGOs, your membership base, especially the ones that show up to your fundraising banquets, the ones that show up to the shovel and pickup events, those people have buy-in, and all you got to do is ask the question and they show up. And that's so powerful because not only are they giving their $35 a year, more value than that is their time, and they're willing to do that.
Yeah.
So once you inspire them and say, hey man, we're not, here's not a canned fill out form to your legislator. Can you just do it? And they rise to the occasion.
Every
ordered out.
single time.
It's huge. It's huge. All right. So we'll leave it there. Before we do, I do have one fun question. Maybe it gets super deep for you, but we're not going to get too deep because we have like 3 minutes left. Starting with John, finish this sentence. Future generations deserve an outdoors where?
Accessible to everyone.
We'll leave it there. Gentlemen, thanks for your time. Appreciate your
Brett.
leadership. Thank you for the partnership and all that we get done throughout the legislative sessions and beyond. Have a great NAS Summit. Appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thank you, Fred.
All right. Thanks for joining us on this edition of the Sportsman's Voice podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, your support is crucial, and you can help us out right now by leaving a review, filling in those 5 stars where available, sharing this episode with friends and family, and engaging with us socially. CSF can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and X, formerly known as Twitter. Together, we can protect the outdoor sports we love and continue to keep you informed wherever you are. That's it for this week. Until next time, we'll see you later.